It flows directly from questions, I believe, if it's dealt with very briefly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Directly from questions, I believe, if it's dealt with very briefly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You will be aware of my campaign to introduce Helen's Law. On the 14th of September, I asked and wrote to the Justice Secretary asking him to meet with Mary McCourt, Helen's mother, and victims' families about this. Having not received a reply 2 months later, I tabled a parliamentary question to ask when that was likely to come. That parliamentary question was answered on the 1st of December and said that correspondence had been sent to my office on the 16th of November. After a trawl of my correspondence, I found that none such had been received, and having contacted the Ministry of Justice, it transpired that in fact none had been sent because it was still waiting on ministerial approval. What does it say about the government's attitude to the families of victims who suffered so grievously? And can you advise me, Mr. Speaker?
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Gentleman. I can certainly advise him. I say to the Honourable Gentleman two things. Very important matter though it is, it doesn't flow from this oral questions session, which I had perhaps wrongly understood it to do. Secondly, may I offer a tip to the Honourable Gentleman, which he could learn from many a senior hand in this place. If that happens again, what the Honourable Gentleman should do is table a question to the Minister. Let me finish. He should table a question to the Minister demanding to know when that which was promised will be delivered. Now, the Honourable Gentleman is gesticulating from a sedentary position to give the impression that that is precisely what he did. If he still didn't get a response, he should have done, but persistence pays, and he should just keep going until he gets there, or alternatively, he should approach the Minister's office and seek a meeting. This is a very unsatisfactory state of affairs, but knowing the Secretary of State for Justice as I do, he is polite to a fault, and therefore the error will have been inadvertent. It is extremely incompetent, but no further time of the House should be taken up today. I suggest that they meet, but it is most unsatisfactory, I readily acknowledge to the Honourable Gentleman. Urgent question, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To ask the Secretary of State for exiting the European Union if he'll make a statement on progress of the Brexit negotiations between the UK and the European Union.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I start by apologising for my voice. Once again, I have acquired the single European cough, but hopefully it will pass. Negotiations regarding our exit from the European Union are ongoing as we speak. Indeed, we're in the middle of an ongoing round, and as such, I have to be a bit more circumspect than usual. Right? We held further talks in Brussels over the past few days, and progress has been made, but we've not yet reached a final conclusion. However, I believe we are now close to concluding the first phase of negotiations and moving on to talk about our future trade relations. There is much common understanding, and both sides agree that we must move forward together. Our aims in this negotiation remain as they have always been. In particular, on the issue of Northern Ireland and Ireland, we have been clear we want to protect all elements of the Good Friday Belfast Agreement to maintain the common travel area and to protect associated rights. We want to ensure there is no hard border between Ireland and Northern Ireland. We recognise that as we exit, we must respect the integrity of the EU single market and the customs union. But we're equally clear we must respect the integrity of the United Kingdom. There remain some final issues to resolve which require further negotiation and consultation over the coming days. Our officials are in continuous contact and we expect to reconvene in Brussels later this week for further negotiations. I or the Prime Minister will formally update Parliament once this round of negotiations concludes, as I have done for every round so far. As was made clear by the comments from President Juncker and President Tusk yesterday, all parties remain confident of reaching a positive conclusion in the course of the week.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, what an embarrassment. The last 24 hours have given a new meaning to the phrase coalition of chaos. Yesterday morning, Number 10 was briefing that a deal would be signed. There was high expectation that the Prime Minister would make a triumphant statement to the House. By tea time, we had a 49-second press conference saying the deal was off. It's one thing, Mr. Speaker, to go to Brussels and fall out with those on the other side of the negotiating table. It's quite another to go to Brussels and fall out with those supposedly on your own side of the negotiating table. If ever there was a day for the Prime Minister to come to this House and to answer questions, it's today. But, Mr. Speaker, let's not be fooled that yesterday was just about choreography. There are two underlying causes of this latest and most serious failure. The first can be traced back to the Prime Minister's conference speech in October last year. That was when she recklessly swept options such as a customs union and the single market off the table and ruled out any role for the European Court, and yet maintained that she could avoid a hard border in Northern Ireland. Well, yesterday the rubber hit the road. Fantasy met brutal reality. Labour is clear that there needs to be a UK-wide response to Brexit. So the question for the government today is this: will the Prime Minister now rethink her reckless red lines and put options such as a customs union and single market back on the table for negotiation? Because if the price of the Prime Minister's approach is the break-up of the Union and reopening of bitter divides in Northern Ireland, then the price is too high. The second major reason for yesterday's failure is that we have a Prime Minister who is so weak that the DUP has a veto over any proposal she makes. What precedent does it set, Mr. Speaker, when the Prime Minister is called out of negotiations at the 11th hour and told by the DUP that the deal is off? What signal does that send to the EU about the Prime Minister's ability to deliver Brexit? Yesterday confirmed what we already knew. The DUP tail is wagging the Tory dog. This is now deeply serious. So what assurance can the Secretary of State give to this House that a deal will be agreed by the end of the week? And will the Secretary of State now drop the proposal for a fixed deadline in law for exit day of the 29th of March 2019? If ever there was an example of why that would be absurd, yesterday was it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Well, the right honourable gentleman's speeches in these statements are becoming rather repetitive. They're always crowing and carping, and I'm crowing and carping. Given my voice, I'll wait it out, Mr. Speaker. Let's start with this issue on single market and customs union. I'm glad to see the Shadow Chancellor sitting there, because he said remaining in the single market will be interpreted as not respecting the referendum result earlier this year.
That's what he said.
And the Shadow International Secretary, I can't see him here, said a permanent customs union is deeply unattractive, as the transitional phase might be thought to have some merit. However, as an end point, it's deeply unattractive. In fact, he described it rather later as a disaster. So much for Labour policy on this matter. We can see why it's changed 10 times in the course of the last year. Now, in terms of the question with respect to the United Kingdom, at the start of answering this question, I said I would be circumspect, and I intend to. I'm not going to go in for tit-for-tat comments. That would be very bad for our negotiations. But I'll take the opportunity to rebut one falsehood I saw being stirred up by various of our political opponents yesterday. The suggestion that we might depart the European Union but leave one part of the United Kingdom behind, still inside the single market and customs union. That is emphatically not something that the UK government is considering. So when the First Minister of Wales complains about it, or the First Minister of Scotland says there's a reason to start banging the tattered drum of independence, or the Mayor of London says it justifies a hard border around the M25, I say they're making a foolish mistake. No UK government would allow such a thing, let alone a Conservative and Unionist one.
Sir William Cash. Would my right honourable friend appreciate that whether it is in relation to regulatory alignment in Northern Ireland or in relation to citizens' rights in respect of these negotiations, there is a serious danger that the European Court of Justice will get itself into every nook and cranny. That there is no way in which it can be contained under Article 344 of the treaty, or for that matter, in relation to the whole question of interpretation of all the matters I've just referred to.
My old friend, who's a long history of wisdom in this subject, is wisdom. He saw it before most of you did. He has a long history of this subject. And he explains really very better than I could why we said no divergence is a bad option.
Peter Grant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On reflection, I think I prefer the phrase "the rubber has hit the road" to the phrase I was going to use to describe yesterday's fiasco. It's no surprise that the leadership contenders are now circling around the Prime Minister, and I can reveal that there is a vacancy coming up because the Prime Minister is today being interviewed for the job of Scotland football manager for her fantastic ability to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory to very good use. Mr. Speaker, a government who said they would bring sovereignty back to Parliament is now being controlled by someone who is not even a member of this Parliament. A government that refuses to give Parliament any say in the development and the negotiating position is now letting that negotiating position be dictated by the leader of a minority Parliament in the smallest of the four nations of this Union. I couldn't put it better than the Shadow Minister has said. What a shambles, what a complete mess. Will the Secretary of State now go back to the document that his government rejected out of hand a year ago, published by the Scottish Government, Scotland's Place in Europe, and will he use that as a basis to produce a solution to what is otherwise an intractable problem? The fact that the government's red lines are not compatible with each other. The conclusion of the Brexit Select Committee only last week is that we were unable to see how it's possible to reconcile leaving the customs union with avoiding a border in Northern Ireland or between Northern Ireland and the Republic. Will the Secretary of State go back to that paper and use it as a basis for reopening negotiations?
Order. I think the honourable gentleman has concluded his remarks. Well, the problem is the honourable gentleman had taken 1.5 minutes plus, and there is huge pressure on time, so I think we must now proceed. Yes, it's only fair, seeing as I allowed him to blurt it out, to allow the Secretary of State briefly to answer. Yes, indeed.
Very briefly. Firstly, I was very surprised at him, of all people, being so dismissive of small nations, in the first instance. Secondly, I'll say to him this, that the document he refers to, the Scottish Government document, was read carefully, and there are elements of it, many elements of it, which are consistent with our negotiating strategy, not least the aim of protecting employment rights. And I really think he should recognise that.
Mr. Rowan Paterson.
Northern Ireland Statistics and Research Agency states that only 5% of Northern Ireland sales cross the border south, and only 1.6% of the Republic's exports go north. The government paper, confirmed by the head of the HMRC, says this is easily surmountable without a hard border. The Belfast Agreement confirmed Northern Ireland as an integral part of the United Kingdom with standard regulation throughout. We are going to leave the single market and the customs union. Will he confirm that this week the integrity of the United Kingdom comes first, and if necessary, no deal is better than a bad deal?
My right honourable friend makes his point well, and I have already confirmed that the integrity of the United Kingdom comes first. This is why we have taken the strategy of saying that the issue of the maintaining a free border, an open border, a frictionless border, is one that's best dealt with in the next phase, in phase 2. Indeed, that's not just my view, it's the view of the Taoiseach, who said on the 20th of August, I think the suggestion that has been made, to a certain extent, is common sense. If we're able to have a trade agreement between the EU and the UK, then of course it will be much easier to sort out issues around any border between Ireland and Northern Ireland. And indeed, I suddenly realised that the right honourable gentleman opposite also said the same thing. To be fair to David Davis, he's right on issues like Northern Ireland. There's only so far you can get before you move to the next phase.
If I'm to accommodate a significant number of colleagues, there's a premium upon brevity, which is always brilliantly exemplified by the Right Honourable Gentleman Member for Leeds Central, Mr. Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We all hope that the government finds a form of words that enables the negotiations to move on to phase 2. But doesn't the government have to realise that the reason there is this problem is because of its decision to leave the customs union and the single market? Now, given that the leader of the Scottish Conservatives and the Mayor of London have both suggested that whether it's convergence or no divergence should be applied to the whole of the United Kingdom, isn't it time for the government finally to recognise that it needs to make a different decision if it is going to avoid the imposition of a hard border in Northern Ireland?
Well, no, I'm afraid, uncharacteristically, he's just wrong about that. As indeed, I just read out the comment from the Taoiseach in August, a comment from his own front bench spokesman on this subject, and the views of other members of his front bench who are completely dismissive of being in the customs union in the long run. And they're right, I'm afraid, in this respect.
Anna Soubry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the British people are fed up to the back teeth with all of this. They want a solution. Now, it may be that regulatory alignment is the solution, but if it's good enough for Northern Ireland, it's good enough for the rest of the country. And we are a union, and we will not allow one deal for one part of our great union and not for the other. May I gently say to the Secretary of State, there is a consensus in this place. Even though the front bench, including the Shadow Chancellor, when we had a debate and a motion in this place, voted against the customs union, over here and over there and down there, we are as one, Mr. Speaker. There is a solution. I don't care how you wrap it up in whatever fancy words, but if it conveys the effect on British business of the single market and the customs union, let's grab it, seize it, rub out the red lines, move on, work together, build a consensus and get a deal for our nation.
Well, my right honourable friend makes her case with a characteristic tenacity, but I will say to her this. She can have it as a guarantee from me, we will not be treating any part of the United Kingdom different from any other part.
Liz Kendall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The way to solve the border issue, protect the Good Friday Agreement and hold our United Kingdom together is to stay in the customs union and single market. Isn't it the case that the government only has itself to blame for choosing to rule this option out when it does not have to, putting the future of our country at risk?
State.
Well, I think she was elected on a manifesto pledge to respect the result of the referendum. And her own Shadow Chancellor said staying in would not respect that result.
Mr. Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my right honourable friend share my sense of gratitude to our friends in the Democratic Unionist Party who have helped Her Majesty's government stick to its own policy in these negotiations? And is it not essential that the red lines on maintaining the United Kingdom and on regulatory divergence whence the benefits of leaving come are indelible red lines?
Secretary of State.
The red line for me is delivering the best Brexit for Britain, and that's what we'll do.
Chris Bryant.
There's not a consensus, actually, in this House about what should happen, but the government is making a choice. It's choosing a majority which is based on the DUP and trying to keep the Conservative Party together, whereas in actual fact there's a vast majority in this House and in the country and in the House of Lords in favour of us staying in the customs union, so we keep the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland together and we don't harm our trade. Why won't he just see that?
As ever, the right honourable gentleman makes an intelligent question, and I will answer it as clearly as I can. He said we're making a choice. We are. And it's based not on any one party. It's based on 17.5 million votes that are cast to leave the European Union.
Mr. Bernard Jenkins.
Speaker, may I just point out to my right honourable friend what I know he will agree with is the consensus that we must deliver is the consensus that was delivered in the referendum vote last year, and that was not for some, and that was not for some half-in, half-out solution now being advocated by Her Majesty's official opposition.
Secretary of State.
He is, of course, right. And the other thing that we can say is that 85% of the members of this House were elected on manifestos that said they would respect that referendum.
Order. I just make 2 points. First of all, there's a lot of noise in the chamber. Members must be heard. And secondly, can I just say very gently to the Secretary of State, I appreciate that he's got trouble with his voice, but that accentuates the importance of the right honourable gentleman facing the House so that we can all hear him. Thank you. Yvette Cooper. Here.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the chaos that was yesterday, it did at least seem to be clear at 9 o'clock in the morning that the government believed in the idea of regulatory alignment for Northern Ireland and for the Republic. But what is his position now? Have they now ditched any idea of regulatory alignment for Northern Ireland? Or do they now recognise that actually regulatory alignment is really important, not just for the Good Friday Agreement, but actually for businesses right across the United Kingdom, and that is what he should be trying to achieve for all of us?
I refer the Honourable Lady to the speech the Prime Minister made in Florence, because in it she dealt with this. Clearly, if they can't read, that's not a problem. But I refer her to that speech because in it she made a very plain case for the sorts of divergence that we would see after we left. And she made the case that there are areas where we want the same outcome but by different regulatory methods. We want to maintain safety. We want to maintain food standards. We want to maintain animal welfare. We want to maintain employment rights. We don't have to do that by exactly the same mechanism as everybody else. That's what regulatory alignment means.
John Barron.
Secretary of State is absolutely right to remind the House that the only way of respecting the result of the referendum is by leaving the customs union, by leaving the single market, and that is part and parcel of the EU. But will he accept that in any negotiation there's going to be ups and downs, and we should remember that both sides to this negotiation have agreed to the principle that nothing is agreed until everything is agreed.
Yes, absolutely. He's right, that was part of the text we were discussing yesterday. And of course there will be ups and downs. Of course there will be pressure points. That's what negotiations are like, I'm afraid. And yesterday, I have to tell the House, it wasn't London that was forecasting an instant outcome, it was Brussels. And we were there, said it's a staging post. We want to get that outcome by the 15th of December. Full stop.
Okay, hurry.
I'm sure millions of people in the public out there are thinking that actually our government is not being tough enough with the European Union, and that actually in these negotiations we should be saying very clearly it is the EU that is stopping the continued cooperation.
Order. I'm very keen to accommodate colleagues. Please rest assured that I will do everything I can to do so, but the Honourable Lady must be heard. Kate Hoey.
It is the EU that is stopping the cooperation that has been very, very good between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. That could continue. They are the people who are stopping this. Isn't it time the government actually say that?
Secretary of State.
The Honourable Lady makes a point which I'm sure is shared by very many members of the public. I said at the beginning of this process, over a year ago, that I would be unusually courteous and polite to the other side in this negotiation. I'll continue to be so, because that's the best way to advance the British cause.
Mr. Crispin Blunt.
And thank you, Mr. Lee. Yesterday's difficulties demonstrate how difficult it's going to be to get an overall agreement. And if there is no trade agreement, there will be no transition period beyond 2019. Will he now ensure that the necessary contingency planning takes place in case that happens, including identifying the best way of making sure that the border between the north and south of Ireland is as soft as possible?
Secretary of State.
I think I've said to his, when he was the chairman of the Select Committee, I think I said to him at that time that we have a great deal of contingency planning underway to deal with all options. You know, the option we're seeking, the free trade agreement, right down to the option we're not seeking, which is no agreement. So that's the whole range, and we're looking at all of them. We're planning for all of them. There are over 150 projects already underway, and there will be more.
Mr. Nigel Dodds.
Mr. Speaker, it should come as no surprise that the Dublin and the Irish government wishes to advance its interests. The way that it has gone about it in such an aggressive and anti-unionist way is disgraceful and has set back Anglo-Irish relations and damaged the relationships built up within Northern Ireland in terms of the devolution settlement, and that is going to take a long time to repair. Secondly, it should come as no surprise that the Democratic Unionist Party stands strong for the Union, stands strong for Northern Ireland's place within the Union under the terms of the devolved settlement, and that we will not allow any settlement to be agreed which causes the divergence politically or economically of Northern Ireland from the rest of the United Kingdom. Because to do so would not only be politically damaging, but will be economically catastrophic for everyone in Northern Ireland, Unionist, Nationalist, Remainer or Brexiteer. And the reality is that one of the good things that came out of yesterday is that from all sides of this House, Labour, Conservative, backbenchers, Ruth Davidson, Carwyn Jones, everybody, there is now an agreement that the United Kingdom stands together and nothing will happen that will cause the break-up of this great United Kingdom.
He's dead right. There's no surprise that the Democratic Unionist Party stands for the United Kingdom. So does the Conservative and Unionist Party equally.
Antoinette Sandbach.
Mr. Speaker, tens of thousands of jobs in my constituency are in sectors which are urging the government to adopt regulatory alignment. Can I therefore offer my support to the Prime Minister in making that offer to the European Union on the condition that it applies, as others have said, to the whole of the United Kingdom?
The presumption of the discussion was that everything we talked about applied to the whole United Kingdom. I reiterate, alignment isn't harmonisation. It isn't having exactly the same rules. It's sometimes having mutually recognised rules, mutually recognised inspection, all of that sort of thing as well. That's what we're aiming at.
Luciana Berger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In his response to my honourable friend for Leicester West, the Brexit Secretary intimated that staying in the customs union and single market would betray the referendum result. No one told my constituents or the country before the referendum that Brexit would entail leaving the customs union and single market. In light of yesterday's shambles, will the Brexit Secretary now readdress and look back at their government's decision and actually go forward to going back into the customs union and single market?
If she will forgive a factual correction, they certainly did. The Prime Minister at the time did. The Chancellor at the time did. Indeed, I think the leaders of the Leave campaign did, and the leaders of the Remain campaign did. But I suggest she looks at the records of the Andrew Marr programme, where they all said that.
Sir Desmond Swade.
May we return to the Prime Minister's original intent that there would be no running commentary? It's driving them into a state of apoplexy when strategic patience is what is required.
Secretary of State.
I thank my honourable friend, my right honourable friend, for his inducement to my patience.
Mr. Ben Bradshaw.
Is serious, Mr. Speaker, about wanting a solution in the national interest that would command majority support in Northern Ireland, the rest of the United Kingdom and in this House, and I'm delighted to say it would seem from my own front bench. Why doesn't he bring a motion to this House to stay in the customs union and the single market on a free vote?
We were elected on a manifesto which said we would leave customs union and single market. Full stop.
Mark Pritchard.
Mr. Speaker, does the Secretary of State believe it is possible to leave the single market and the customs union and yet have UK regulatory alignment?
As I said to my other honourable friend, yes, but using things like mutual recognition and alignment of standards, which does not mean the same standards, it means ones that give similar results.
Joanna Cherry.
I understand that yesterday the Prime Minister had to withdraw agreement to what was her own agreed text as a result of the DUP's intervention. Now, does the Minister really think that's an acceptable way for a British Prime Minister to have to conduct herself in international negotiations?
I refer the Honourable Lady to the short speech of the press conference given by Jean-Claude Juncker, who clearly thought the Prime Minister carried herself off with great dignity and great effectiveness.
Stephen Crabb.
Mr. Speaker, does my right honourable friend agree that what this discussion demonstrates is that there will be no workable solution to the border conundrum, that will satisfy the purists, wherever they stand in the debate. So does he agree with the points made by Bertie Ahern and William Hague in recent days, that the way through this is to show a much greater appetite to use technology-based solutions, and for those problems where technology can't overcome, all sides are just going to have to show flexibility and adaptability on how rigidly they enforce and interpret their own principles and border rules?
My right honourable friend is absolutely on the nail. He clearly didn't go down very well with the Luddite tendency on the other side of the House. But the other thing that's required is that we get on to the second phase and talk about a free trade agreement, because that will facilitate it more than anything else.
Chris Leslie.
Mr. Speaker, maybe the Secretary of State could accept what is a constructive offer from many honourable members across the House. He's heard the Honourable Lady for Broxtowe, for Edisbury, members on this side, who say actually there is a majority in favour of the regulatory alignment that the Prime Minister was putting forward for Northern Ireland, the Republic and the rest of the United Kingdom. With a few exceptions on this side, he would get a lot of votes if he put that question. Why doesn't he just do it?
We have talked at great length about what we mean by regulatory alliance. I just have done it today. And it's not harmonisation, it's not being in the single market, it's not having exactly the same rules. It's this House exercising its democratic right to choose our own laws in such a way that maximise our ability to sell abroad. That's how it will work.
Sir Hugo Swire.
Speaker, is it worth gently reminding the Taoiseach and the government in Dublin of how we behaved when they were in financial trouble and helped bail them out? Is it also worth gently reminding them that post-Brexit, Irish nationals will continue to have the right to live and work in the UK? And finally, is it not worth gently reminding them that the UK is the most important economy to the Republic of Ireland, and we wish to be good and productive neighbours, and they should enter into these negotiations with that long-term view in mind?
I am sure the Irish government is conscious of all those things, but one point I will pick out from what he said. When I last reported to this House, November the 17th I think it was, I reiterated the common travel area, which allows freedom of movement between the two countries, absolute freedom of movement and absolute equality of treatment between their citizens, will continue in place, as will the constitutional protections for the people of Northern Ireland to choose which nationality they wish to adhere to. So we're protecting those rights very, very carefully.
Heidi Alexander.
Mr. Speaker. Can I put it to the Secretary of State that his government's dogmatic insistence upon pulling us out of the single market and customs union is not only threatening our future jobs, rights and prosperity, but is also threatening the future territorial integrity of our country? When he looks back in a few years' time and reflects upon his role in creating this mess, how does he think he will feel?
I'll say again to her what I said at the beginning of this. All of these stories put about by her co-party members yesterday were just nonsense. The Conservative and Unionist Party puts the integrity of the United Kingdom at the forefront of its aims.
Vicky Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my right honourable friend agree that just like the Ashes Test match, the week is not yet over, and that it is in the interests of Ireland as well as the UK to avoid a no-deal Brexit and to find the long-term strategic partnership, and therefore all parties need to keep talking?
My honourable friend has a long and distinguished record in the European Parliament, knows the institutions there as well as anybody, and in that respect she is bringing great wisdom and insight to this discussion, and she is of course absolutely right.
On break.
The government's sheer incompetence is turning these Brexit negotiations into a national humiliation. Is it not time that the Secretary of State agreed that staying in the single market and the customs union is the only way of solving the Northern Ireland border, and indeed staying in permanently? I say that as much for the benefit of the Labour front bench as I do for him, and also giving people a vote on the deal to secure popular support for that stance.
I will break the habit of a lifetime and pay a compliment to the honourable gentleman, and that is that he is at least standing by the manifesto that he stood on in the general election. Of course, as a Liberal Democrat one, it was completely wrong.
John Stevenson.
Mr. Speaker,
Will the Minister reassure me that the Government will pursue a flexible policy when it comes to negotiations with the EU, which includes the possibility of establishing a model similar to Norway or Switzerland, which undoubtedly would benefit the Irish issue? No, the Prime Minister made clear we're not going to establish or take any off-the-shelf model. What we want, we're a very large country in European terms. We have very great trade reach, very great reach in other respects, and we will choose a model which is appropriate to us.
Pat McFadden.
This humiliation yesterday, when she was forced to disagree with herself, shows that this is less a negotiation and more a set of decisions. And those decisions are being framed by the contradictory red lines that the government has thrown out without regard to the consequence on hard border, single market and customs union. His colleague Ruth Davidson said this morning, if regulatory alignment of specific areas is the requirement for a frictionless border, then the Prime Minister should conclude that this must be on a UK-wide basis. She's right, isn't she?
What I will say, the honourable gentleman, given he's a Labour Party member, is he must have much greater experience than I have of disagreeing with himself. Look at his own front bench, look at the 11 different positions they've taken.
Mr. Peter Bone.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Did you notice, just at the end of the Shadow Minister's question, he committed the Labour Party to drop the 29th of March 2019 as when we come out of the European Union. Could the Secretary of State confirm that it is the government's policy that we are definitely coming out by the 29th of March 2019?
It's not just the government's policy, it's the law of the European Union.
Alison McGovern.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I ask the Secretary of State to confirm when the Cabinet took the decision that our country would leave the single market and the customs union?
Well, it was effectively, as somebody said from behind me, from a sedentary position, the 24th of June 2016. I can't remember the exact date when that specific decision was taken, but the decision is one that reflects the judgment of the British people.
Mr. David Jones.
My right honourable friend agree that maintaining the integrity of our country requires that there should never be any internal borders, economic or otherwise, within the territory of the United Kingdom?
Yes, he's absolutely right.
David Simpson.
Speaker, the Secretary of State will know that this party and the businesses in Northern Ireland have advocated a sensible Brexit deal with Northern Ireland. But would he also agree that those that could risk everything because of their intransigence is the Republic of Ireland, and they could lose the biggest out of this?
He's asking me to break my vow of courtesy, so I'll say get thee behind me, Satan, for this time anyway.
Paul Masterton.
Mr. Speaker, does my right honourable friend agree with me that if regulatory alignment in certain specific areas is a requirement to solve the Northern Ireland border issue, then protecting the constitutional integrity of the United Kingdom requires that solution to be adopted UK-wide?
What I'll say to him is that every approach we take will treat the whole of the United Kingdom as a single constitutional entity and a single economic entity.
Angela Eagle.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday our Prime Minister was humiliated by having the rug pulled from under her by the DUP, and even wasn't she naive to attempt to do a deal of the sort that she tried to do, knowing that the DUP would inevitably veto it. So, with the negotiations in such fantastic hands, will he now admit that the only way of moving forward without a hard border in Northern Ireland to protect the jobs of my constituents is for us to stay in the customs union and the single market?
Stay.
No.
Richard Graham.
Mr. Speaker, this urgent question is spectacularly badly timed in the middle of talks to move to the next phase. And the truth is that...
Order. The honourable gentleman will resume his seat. The honourable... Order. Order. I'll deal with this. The honourable gentleman... Order. The honourable gentleman is unfailingly courteous. He is entitled to criticise a member for submitting a question. It's not for the honourable gentleman to question the judgment of the chair. I took the view that this matter warranted the attention of the House of Commons today. If the honourable gentleman wishes to depart from that view, he shouldn't express it on the floor of the House. If he's got a serious question to ask, I'm happy to hear it, but I seek his assurance that he's not arguing the toss with the chair. Mr. Richard Graham.
I would never dream to do that, Mr. Speaker, but my point was that many, if not most, negotiations come good towards the end, and therefore, rather than sledging the government, I urge the Secretary of State and the Prime Minister to maintain their resilience and patience and see this through, which will require compromises on all sides to reach a good solution.
Thank you. Secretary of State.
He makes a very good point.
Chukaramuna.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State talks about the will of the people, but of course he put leaving the customs union and the single market to the electorate at the general election, and they lost their majority. Can I ask him a very specific question? Clearly, there is not a consensus to have an arrangement where only Northern Ireland is part of the single market and the customs union. And no business or government I've spoken to thinks technology is the answer. He has said he doesn't think keeping the UK overall in the customs union and the single market is the answer. What does he believe is?
A comprehensive free trade agreement, a customs agreement, and all the associated regulatory alignment. Now, while I'm on my feet, I'll just pick him up on the result of the general election. I'll remind him, 85% of the people in this House were elected on manifestos which said, leave the European Union.
Mr. Stephen Hammond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend will of course be aware that the UK has a large surplus in services with the EU. Does he agree with me that for the continued success of legal, professional and financial services post-Brexit, not only mutual recognition but UK-wide regulatory alignment with the EU will be necessary for that success?
If he means by alignment then mechanisms such as mutual recognition, then yes, I agree entirely.
Lucy Powell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I am, though, slightly confused now because yesterday the government seemed to accept the principle that the only way to achieve no border or a soft border in Northern Ireland and Republic of Ireland was to achieve regulatory alignment. Does that principle today now still stand, that they accept that principle is the only way to deliver that frictionless border?
Secretary of State.
Well, I can understand her confusion if she hasn't been listening for the last half an hour. The simple truth is that what we will need to do is establish arrangements whereby we get the same or similar outcomes for some areas of industry and some areas of service. No more, no less.
Andrew Mearison.
What can be done to help our good friend, the Irish government, climb down from the position that it was unwittingly misled in adopting yesterday?
Secretary of State.
What I say to my honourable friend, right honourable friend, I think, is the aim of this negotiation is together to get to an outcome which serves our interests, the EU 27's interests, and particularly Ireland's interests, because, as he says, they are our good friends and they are the people who are in some ways closest to us.
Mr. Gavin Newlands.
Mr. Speaker, if the Secretary of State is so confident that we in this place, the media and the general public, are misinterpreting what may or may not have been in the draft agreement, will they publish it to clear things up?
Secretary of State.
I can't imagine he thinks that would advance the negotiations one jot.
James Cartledge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The EU Trade Commissioner, Cecilia Malmström, has today tweeted that when we leave, our existing free trade agreements with the EU will not be rolled over, which is obviously an extremely significant point. And therefore, further to the question from our fellow member for Carlisle, does it not add weight to at least considering those trade models where we are able to negotiate our own trade deals globally, but remain a member of those that EFTA currently has?
Well, there's more than one benefit from departing from the European Union. One of them is the trade arrangements, and I have to say we are well advanced in our plans for dealing with those ongoing trade arrangements and making sure that we do roll them over.
Albert Owen.
Speaker, yesterday for the first time the Secretary of State realised the importance of the Irish border issue extends beyond the island of Ireland. Will he, moving forward, to unite the United Kingdom, meet with the Scottish First Minister, the Welsh First Minister, to talk about regulatory alignment, because it impacts on everyone? If he wants to unite this United Kingdom, he has to do better.
Well, in response to his first half of his question, I just recommend he goes back and reads some Hansards of my statements here. It proves he's absolutely wrong. It's quite a calumny, really. And as for the First Ministers, well, actually there's a thing called the Joint Ministerial Committee, which meets with representatives of all of the devolved administrations on a regular basis. Sadly, the Northern Ireland Executive is not there at the moment, which is one of the difficulties we have to deal with.
Richard Drax.
Mr. Speaker, we leave the EU in 16 months' time. Will my right honourable friend assure the House and the country that the EU delegates are well aware that we are preparing to fall back on WTO rules if negotiations fail?
I think that's been apparent for some time.
Mr. Stephen Doughty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Secretary of State think that it furthers the cause of the Union to refer to the actions of the First Minister of Wales and the First Minister of Scotland as foolish, as he did a moment ago? They're not foolish. When it comes to the single market and the customs union, they are absolutely right.
Yeah, perhaps he wants to give advice to them as to how they describe other people.
Bob Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the big prizes to be gained from being free of the European Union is to enable us, as a United Kingdom, to negotiate our own free trade deals across the world. Will my right honourable friend confirm that nothing in these agreements is going to fetter our ability to do that?
Tuesday.
Yes.
Dear Hobhouse.
Mr. Speaker, will he accept that leaving the customs union was not on the ballot paper on the 23rd of June 2016?
What was said earlier was that nobody voted for that. Nobody knew this was a consequence. In fact, both sides of in the referendum campaign made it absolutely plain. Departure from the union meant departure from the customs union.
Chris Bell.
Given that in European negotiations nothing is agreed until everything is agreed, does the Secretary of State agree that any concessions we may now make are contingent on reaching a satisfactory end-state free trade deal in the future?
Yes, he's right. In every European Union negotiation, that phrase, nothing is agreed till everything is agreed, is a mantra, and it matters. Yeah.
Mike Gapes.
Mr. Speaker, can the Secretary of State tell us the difference between regulatory convergence and regulatory alignment?
One's about harmonisation, one's not.
The Secretary of State said one's about harmonisation and the other's not. Somebody was suggesting he or she couldn't hear. Mike Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Secretary of State confirm that in these negotiations the government still aims to conclude an agreement on an implementation phase as early as possible in the new year, and that that agreement would similarly benefit the European Union?
Tuesday.
Yes, he's exactly right on both counts.
Alan Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So despite trying to cave in every EU ask so far, this government has not been able to conclude the preliminary negotiations in 18 months, and we're to believe they'll conclude the substantive negotiations in 15 months. They haven't been able to agree a good deal with the DUP, but yet we're to believe they'll get a good deal from the 27 member states. It's so obvious they don't know a good deal from a bad deal, and we're heading to a no-deal scenario. So when we start doing some planning and present transparent information and the implications of that.
Tuesday.
The Honourable Gentleman seems to be having an argument with himself in that question. It's 7 months of negotiation so far, and it will be concluded.
Robert Halfon.
Could I ask the Secretary of State just to where is the government in terms of our post-club membership of handing over a bill to the European Union? And also what is the amount that's being decided? Is it 40 billion, 50 billion, or more or less?
I'm afraid I'm not going to be drawn on numbers at the moment, but we are pretty close to alignment on that.
Darren Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Irish
Irish issue has never been about wandering cows or static cameras. It has been what's behind me, that we have more in common. The Irish are our closest neighbours, and that is the basis of the Good Friday Agreement, which is very disappointing that the Secretary of State did not mention in his opening statement. I repeat the same question I have asked the Secretary of State, the Prime Minister and other ministers 6 times since January. When will the Prime Minister show courtesy to the people of Northern Ireland and put a date in her diary to at least visit? If she had been there and listened and talked to people, she might not have ended up in the farce which was yesterday.
Well, let's start with the opening of her question. She says we didn't mention the Northern Ireland Agreement. I'll read the paragraph from my opening statement. In particular, on the issue of Northern Ireland, we've been clear we want to protect all elements of the Good Friday Belfast Agreement to maintain a common travel area and to protect associated rights. So much for that.
Michael Tomlinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Despite the noise coming from many on the benches opposite, is it not right that actually at this stage of the talks we're closer to an agreement than we ever have been, and that is a good thing? Progress has been made, and that we should want to move on to talks about trade which will be in our national interest and also in the EU's interest as well?
Yes, it's exactly right. That's pretty much what Jean-Claude Juncker said yesterday.
Lady Herman.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Speaker, for calling me. While I readily accept that there are 10 members of the DUP in this House, duly elected, the DUP nevertheless do not speak for all of the people of Northern Ireland. And do not represent all the people of Northern Ireland. So would the Secretary of State for Brexit just take a few moments to explain to this House, and particularly to all of the people of Northern Ireland and to the rest of the United Kingdom, the benefits of the proposals for the whole country, which the Prime Minister was taking to Brussels yesterday? I was profoundly embarrassed on her behalf.
The aim for the whole country, as she says, is to maximise the trade benefits of being outside the customs union and single market, whilst at the same time maintaining as much as possible of the benefits that we currently enjoy. Now, that's the aim, and that's what we're heading towards, and I'm pretty confident it's what we'll achieve.
Catherine McKinnell.
It's increasingly clear to anyone watching that the government is incapable of focusing on anything but Brexit, and even then is making a complete holics of it. So what reassurance can the Secretary of State give that the government is ready to put country before party, not just on this border issue, but on our crucial trade negotiations with the EU and the rest of the world?
Secretary of State.
I know, is holics a parliamentary word, Mr. Speaker? I'll use it in future myself. And of course I am the Brexit Secretary, so it is what I focus on most of the time. But the simple fact is, the free trade agreement she talks about is precisely what we're aiming for. It's exactly what we and Brussels want to get to as quickly as possible.
The word is certainly not unparliamentary. It could be said to constitute a form of advertising, but it is not disorderly. Or indeed a euphemism, as the Right Honourable Gentleman pertinently observes from a sedentary position. Mr. Andrew Slaughter.
Speaker, when will we have a decision on the rights of EU nationals in the UK, who the Secretary of State has yet again forgotten about amidst the current chaos? There are more than 3 million people who are in limbo as to their future rights, including many Irish citizens to whom we have a particular and long-standing duty.
Secretary of State.
And we recognise that duty. Indeed, I have said from this dispatch box we view it as a moral imperative. And we've made plain that we are doing everything possible to ensure that they carry on their lives as they do now. We've made that plain. I really wish the Honourable Gentleman wouldn't frighten people by taking the opposite view.
Stephen Timms.
But the customs union wasn't on the ballot paper at the referendum. The Prime Minister was right yesterday to be willing to sign up to regulatory alignment between Northern Ireland and the EU. From his answers today, the Secretary of State, I think, is suggesting that regulatory alignment should apply to the UK as a whole. Will he confirm that is the point that he's making, and explain how he sees that being delivered?
Well, of course, the referendum question was a short question, but it was a very long campaign. And in that campaign, both sides made it plain that being outside the union meant being outside the customs union and outside the single market. Both sides made it, and I can point him, if need be, to the television programmes upon which it was said. What I've explained to the House is regulatory alignment is not harmonisation. It's a question of ensuring similar outcomes in areas where you want to have trade relationships and free and frictionless trade. And anything we agree for Northern Ireland in this respect, if we get our free trade area, will apply to the whole country.
Matt Weston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could the Secretary of State just confirm today that Brexit is the easiest thing in human history? And if it is, how is it that this government is incapable of making it so?
As you can see, it's a complete cinch. Yes.
Mrs. Ellen Goodman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Of course, the British people voted to leave the European Union, but the common market is extremely popular with the public. We joined the customs union in 1973. Not only would staying in it help to resolve the Irish issues, it would also boost British exporters across the country.
Here. Stay.
I'll say to the Honourable Lady that if it had been still a common market, I suspect the vote might have been different.
Reading.
Mr. Speaker, he says a vote to leave was a vote to leave the single market and customs union, but that is not what leavers said. He said that the Conservative manifesto committed to pulling us out of both, but that's not what the majority of the public voted for. Isn't it time to accept he will have a majority in this House for a Brexit based on membership of the single market and the customs union, but we will never give him a majority for a destructive hard Brexit?
Nobody wants a majority for a destructive Brexit. We want a majority for a constructive Brexit.
Andrew Henry.
Speaker, the Prime Minister pushed the Secretary of State to one side to take personal responsibility for leading the negotiations yesterday. Why is she not here today to update the House? Did Arlene Foster say no?
I don't know. You complain when I come, you complain when I don't come. I mean
Mr. Peter Kyle.
Mr. Speaker. The choices the Secretary of State has made has led him into a cul-de-sac where he now has to make a choice between honouring the spirit of the Good Friday Agreement or pleasing the right-wingers on his own side and the DUP. Which choice is he going to make?
I have to make the choice that preserves everything in the Good Friday Agreement and also ensures that we preserve the United Kingdom of Great Britain, Northern Ireland.
Ian Paisley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Secretary of State for proving yesterday that he can listen and that when he tells Europe no, he means no. And we thank you on behalf of the people of Northern Ireland for that matter. Would he also take the opportunity, at the next available opportunity, to speak to the Dublin Government and to let them know that if they continue down this reckless path, they will end up stomping up a further £1.5 billion in membership fees to the European Union if they do not get a trade deal with us. Better move to a trade dealer sooner rather than later.
As I said before, I'm not going to go in for any tit for tat with other governments. But what I will say to him is this. He's absolutely right. The best outcome for Ireland is a free trade deal and a customs agreement. That will preserve by far and away the largest portion of their trade and protect their economy. And that's what we're trying to do.
Adrian Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday's events were a shambles that must undermine our credibility in our negotiations with the EU. However, if there is two positives out of it. It's first the belated recognition of this government of the importance of regulatory realignment or alignment with Europe in order to go forward, and secondly the display of unity with all parts of the United Kingdom in demanding that what is good for one is good for all of them. Will the Minister recognise the logic of that and change his position and negotiate on the basis of access to the single market and the customs union?
Firstly, he does not need to point out to a member of the Conservative and Unionist Party the importance of the United Kingdom. Secondly, it does not require membership of the single market. As far as I remember, we were a union of the United Kingdom well before we were a member of the single market.
Clive Efford.
Speaker, the Article 50 was designed to be harsh on the country that it's triggered it. And the author of it, Mr. Giuliano Amato, the former Italian Prime Minister, described it as a clause, a safety valve that was there but never to be used. Aren't we setting an unrealistic timescale, and isn't it time for us to seek to delay implementation of leaving the European Union so that we can resolve issues around the customs union and the single market?
No, I don't agree with him, and if I give him one piece of advice about negotiations, it's don't give up before you start.
Alex Abel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As Arlene Foster now seems to be running the rule over the government's EU exit negotiations, do we expect a member of the DUP bench to be joining his team on a confidence and supply arrangement? No.
Perhaps he should. Perhaps you'd offer that question over there, not over here.
You need to offer that.
Ruth Cadbury.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State says he's serious about delivering the best for the United Kingdom and that he thinks that Brexit is a cinch. So, if the EU Commissioners estimate there are currently 142 areas of North-South cooperation that depend on EU law, is the plan for Northern Ireland to remain aligned in each of these 142 areas or more widely?
Firstly, she should not take sarcasm as a fact. The second thing I'd say to her is the 142 areas do not all rely on EU law. I'm afraid she's factually wrong.
Paul Faraday.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Presuming that the government does at some stage finally make progress, if we do leave the single market, can the Secretary of State outline to the House what sort of agreement he expects to reach for UK access to the European market for services?
I would expect that too. But, well, firstly, we have made a lot of progress. The question at the moment this week is sufficient progress. That's the first thing. Second thing, and that, by the way, I'm quoting Jean-Claude Juncker again. Excuse me. With respect to his substantive question, we would expect the free trade agreement to include a services section.
Daniel Zeichner.
My honourable friend, the member for Hammersmith, rightly raised the issue of citizens' rights. There are thousands of people in my constituency worried about their future, millions across Britain and the European Union. Last year we were told this would be sorted out swiftly and quickly, it would be simple. It turns out it's much more complicated. Couldn't the Minister tell us what the position now is in relation to jurisdiction by the European Court of Justice?
That's one of the elements that was being discussed this week, and I think the main aim here is not the ECJ jurisdiction. It's a question of getting the treatment of both British citizens and European citizens to be symmetrical, to be similar.
Thank you. Order. Statement, the Secretary of State for the Home Department, Secretary Amber Rudd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to make a statement on David Anderson's report published today on recent terrorist attacks and all those affected.